Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another 4-part harmony tutorial video. Today we are looking at harmonizing a simple melody line using the rules that we have learned throughout our 4-part harmony tutorial playlist. If you have not checked out our playlist, you can find a link in the description below. Otherwise, you can click on the card right here now. And yeah, I hope you enjoy this video, and let's just get straight into it. Okay, so before we get to the meat and potatoes of harmonizing our melody line, we need to decide on a few basic steps that will help us guide ourselves to success. So step number 1 would be decide on a suitable chord progression. So this has got to do with your figuring, and your figuring will really be dependent on your melody line. The melody line that is given, or one that maybe you have composed yourself. So decided on your melody. Step number 2 is to now decide on a suitable bass line. And this bass line is really dependent on the figurings of your choice. So based on the figuring, we could actually say figuring from step 1. Now, you generally want a nice smooth running bass line. Of course, bass lines can leap, especially in context of cadences. Like, for example, the perfect cadence 5/1. We generally have a leap of a fifth. But if you want a more smoother bass line, this step will also help you decide if you're going to use inversions or not. So what I'll do is I'll write here inversions or not. So of course, when you get to deciding on a bass line, you will then have to decide, are you going to use an inversion or not? Does it work in the context of your chord progression? You know, you generally want to not have an inversion right at the end from, say, the perfect cadence 5/1, things like that. So following these 2 steps will really help you. And then it's just a matter of going to step 3, which is then completing the 4-part with the alto and tenor voices. Of course, you want to apply good voice leading techniques so that everything is running nice and smooth. Okay, now that we've had a look at the steps needed to harmonize a simple melody line, here we have the melody line, and we're in the key of B flat major. So I'll just go and write that down there. And also time signature 2/4, our first bar is 2 B flats repeated, followed by another B flat in bar 2, which then moves up to a C, repeated again, down to a B flat, and then finally finishing off with 2 more B flats. Let's have a quick listen to that. It's a pretty simple line. Alright, so now that we've had a listen to that, we kind of get an idea of how it sounds. So let us now follow our steps and get down our figuring first. So we've got 2 B flats over here and 1 at the end, so we can assume that we're going to start this melody maybe on the tonic and possibly end it on the tonic, just to kind of keep things nice and simple. It also allows a potential cadence at the end, which is always a good idea. So for my first chord here, I'm going to actually use chord 1. And then I'm looking at my melody again. It's a B flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a technique known as chord repetition. And so I'm going to keep that as chord 1. So we're going to have 2 voicings here that will be identical. And we'll get to some of the rules needed for that in a second. Next up, I'm going to use chord 4. And the triad for that is B, C, D, E, E, E flat, G, B flat. B flat works because it's in the melody line, so therefore chord 4 works. Next up, I'm going to follow my chord 4 with its secondary substitution, and that'll be chord 2. And we will decide soon in our bass line if we're going to maybe add some inversions along the way, but for now, I'll just keep it as chord 2. Next up, we're going to follow chord 2 with its very standard chord of chord 5, which is triad of B flat. That chord 5 is F, A, C. We've got a C in the melody line, so it works out. And then we go back to a B flat over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually now use chord 6, which follows chord 5 very well. And then from chord 6, we are then going to go to chord 4, which, as we know from our previous video, follows chord 6 very well. And then, like I said at the beginning of this, we'll end off with a tonic chord 1 in root position. Alright, now that we have our figuring down, we need to decide on our bass line, as needed with the steps discussed early on in this video. So the first thing we need to do is look at our first 2 chords here, and like I said, we're going to be doing chord repetition. The triad is B, D, F in B flat major. So we'll go ahead and get that down. Chord 4, the triad is E, G, B flat. So now we can go ahead and get our bass line down for that. We're going to keep it in root position. Now, we could have, if we had learnt chords in second inversion, maybe we could have started on the B flat here, but we haven't gotten to that point yet in our tutorial playlist. So we're just working with the rules that we've done up until this point. So we're going to keep it simple and simply start on the root over there. Now, chord 2 is where we have an option to use first inversion. The triad here is C, E, G. So if we kept it on the roots, it would then leap down by a third, which isn't really much of a leap and would be completely fine. But because the third is an E, if we wrote this as second inversion, we could then keep our bass line nice and steady over there. So we're going to have that as a chord 2 in first inversion. Next up is chord 5. The triad over there is F, A, C. And so our bass line in root position will be right over there. And this is another reason why having chord 2 in first inversion works so well, is because instead of coming down to a C and then simply leaping up or down to an F, we now are just moving by step up to the F. Next up is chord 6. And that is G, B flat, D. So we can go ahead and write the root note for that. And then right at the end, we've got our plagal cadence of 4-1, which again is E, and then finishing off with B flat in the bass. And now we have our bass line. Don't worry about the stems. Of course, we changed that. You know, it is Sibelius, so we changed that right at the end. But now we've got our bass line and we've got our melody line. So all that's left to do is to fill out our alto and tenor voice parts for each chord. Okay, so the next section deals with writing and completing this example. So the first thing we need to do is look at our chords and see now what have we got crossed off in our triad from the bass and the soprano. So chord 1 over here, these 2 chords in fact, we've got both B flats completed. So now we just need to simply decide, are we going to go to the third in the tenor and the F in the alto, or are we going to swap it around and do something a little different? But for this example, I'm actually going to go to the D at the top and then finish off with the F in the alto. Now, because we're using chord repetition, which I will just make reference to over there, we can literally repeat this chord with the next chord, or beat 2 rather, in bar 1. Now, something to bear in mind with chord repetition is that if you have parallel octaves or fifths, you don't need to worry about them because the chord is repeated. Therefore, there is no movement, and so it is completely fine. But of course, if you're going from chord 1 to chord 4 and you've got a parallel octave or fifth, you need to make sure that you're not following it with another parallel octave or fifth in a chord that is now shifting. Okay, so for chord 4 over here, we have our E in the bass and a B in the soprano. So we can either decide to double the fifth or potentially double our root note again. So let's have a look and see, where does the third come into play? Well, it moves quite nicely in the alto from F. And by doubling our root, the D simply moves up by a step quite nicely too. So let's go ahead and double that. And then we'll throw in the third in the alto. Now be careful, we do have an octave over here. So we need to make sure that we don't follow it with another octave between bass and tenor in chord 2 over here. So our rule is to, chord 2 in first inversion is to double the third as far as possible. We have a C in the soprano and an E in the bass. So let's go ahead. If we write an E over here, we're going to get parallel octaves, which won't be very good. So what we're going to do is double our roots, because doubling the third in this case is not going to be great voice leading. So let us go ahead and get our C in the tenor. And then we are going to get our fifth down in the alto, which again works well because our alto part then is just staying nice and constant. Onto chord 5, F, A, C. We've got an F in the bass and we've got a C in the soprano. What works well? G moves up to an A quite nicely, and the C stays constant in the tenor. Again, we are making sure that we don't have any parallel fifths or octaves. Over here, we've got a sixth, and over here, we've got a fifth, so that's working out pretty well. So let's move on to chord 6. Now, chord 6 over here, we probably want to double the third, just so that we avoid any unnecessary parallel fifths and octaves again. So we've got a G in the bass, which works out pretty well. Let's double our third, which is already in the soprano, but we've got it now in our tenor. And then we simply need to get down either our fifth, or perhaps we want to actually get rid of the fifth completely and just simply double the root. So now we've got a chord over here that's got G, B, G, and B again in the soprano. Onto chord 4. Onto chord 4, we've got an E in the bass and a B in the soprano. So, E, G, B is our triad. Again, let's get that B down. That fifth is there. We're going to double it this time. And now all we need to do is get our third down, the G. And then finally, to finish off the progression with a nice plagal cadence of 4/1, we've got B in the bass and B in the soprano. So let us get that D and F down. So we're either going to go up to a D and finish off with an F. The alto moving naturally down to the F makes sense. And instead of leaping down to a D, we're going to go to a D up there. And there you have the melody line harmonized in 4 parts, following some basic steps and some common voice leading techniques. Let's have a listen to this and see how it sounds. Let me slow that down quick and let's have a listen to it again. And there we have it, a nice 1, 4, 5, 4, 1 progression where we've used chord repetition. We've used chord 2 in first inversion as a secondary substitute following chord 4. Then we're going to chord 5, chord 6, and then finally finishing off with a nice plagal cadence at the end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting that like and maybe that subscribe button. If you didn't, a dislike, no problem at all. I hope that you have a great day further, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.